art is a reflection of a certain culture in its present time or through a historical lens. Modern mainstream filmmaking, in my opinion, has taken a decline, especially when it comes to storytelling. Many films have become a mere propaganda piece in which, when talking about complex subjects that complex humans face on a daily basis, they fail to understand and to manifest those complex topics in art. Therefore, we are left with postmodern art, overly simplified stories, or absurdism. In the so-called black community, many artists have sprang forth into society from many art forms, from the poetry of Langston Hughes, the music of the plethora of artists of the Harlem Renaissance, the fictional stories of Zora Neale Hurston, and the visual storytelling of Oscar Micheaux. Micheaux was a pioneering so-called black filmmaker who led the charge of creating films specifically geared towards the so-called black audience in the time where black folks represented in art was not publicized, or it was simply minstrelized to please a so-called white audience. The strength of Micheaux was not only being a great film director, but he was a great storyteller that was not afraid to tell stories that showed that so-called black folks were complex human beings just like any human beings that belong to any and every culture around the world. The Symbol of the Unconquered is a prime example of countering the negative stereotypes and minstrelizations with true and complex portrayals of so-called black characters. The unfortunate truth, however, to this film is that parts of it are lost. But the parts that were able to be preserved shows that this film possibly is one of Micheaux's greatest works. Though missing in part, we can see that Micheaux's The Symbol of the Unconquered offered many different character archetypes that we can learn from, and stories of an unfortunate race with unfortunate events that they face during this time. It is a fascinating piece of art and history that everyone who is into art and film should take the time to observe. This is Micheaux's lost masterpiece, The Symbol of the Unconquered. The Symbol of the Unconquered tells the story of two black characters facing racial prejudice and land ownership struggles in the early 20th century in the Northwest region of the United States. Our main characters are Yvonne Mason, played by Miss Iris Hall. Yvonne is a young black woman from Selma, Alabama, who inherits a large plot of land in Orristown in the Northwest region after her grandfather's death. Yvonne has light skin, allowing her to initially pass as white in certain situations. Our co-lead is Hugh Van Allen, played by Walker Thompson. He was a black homesteader struggling to hold onto his land in the same area. He is hardworking and determined and is fearless, especially against the antagonist of the story, Jefferson Driscoll, who is a light-skinned black man that passed for white and abhorred black folks. When Jefferson finds out that Hugh's land was sitting on oil, Jefferson tried to scare him off that land to take it for himself by using threats and even sending the Ku Klux Klan. After watching this film a couple of times, the themes that were revealed unto me were land ownership and resistance and racial passing. If anyone knows about Oscar Micheaux, he was highly influenced by Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was a strong advocate for land ownership, especially for the so-called black race. In this film, our main characters, Yvonne and Hugh, both owned land. Hugh seemed to have bought the land for himself, while Yvonne was given this land by her dying grandfather. Her grandfather's last words was for her to be resilient, and as she was looking for the land in a new town that she was strange to, she ended up finding it thanks to Hugh. They both worked on their land and both looked out for each other. For Yvonne, she never homesteaded before, and Hugh clearly was the expert in that field. The issues that arose up in owning land were these two things. First, the travail of homesteading comes forth because in homesteading, you are truly relying on nature and God to have a fruitful land. The second issue that arises is something that was very prevalent at that time for so many so-called black folks that owned land. I actually have family members on my father's side who own land in Louisiana, but the people in the community along with the government scare them off the land through certain means that we will get into, and they traveled all the way to Los Angeles. Now in this film, the antagonist, Jefferson Driscoll, hated black folks and hated Hugh very much. Now, the reason why he hated Hugh was that Jefferson tried to swindle Hugh by selling him a stolen horse. And when Hugh found out that he was played, he found Jefferson, and Jefferson caught his fade losing in front of his peers. Jefferson vowed to seek revenge, and almost as if it was divine, while Hugh was coming from the post office, Hugh drops a letter. Jefferson ends up finding that letter, and that letter showed the value of Hugh's land, which, unbeknownst to Hugh, had oil. And we know oil is king. Jefferson Driscoll and the other bandits connive a plan to buy the land off from Hugh by any means. And by any means, if Hugh refused to sell them the land, they will send the Ku Klux Klan, aka the KKK, to scare him off the land. Hugh resists the threats of the Klan, and the Klan chose to do a midnight rite for Hugh to get that message. Thanks to the Divine God and Yvonne, as well as others who we don't get to see due to parts of the film being missing, we know that the KKK and Jefferson Driscoll were annihilated and lost. Months later, Hugh finally discovers why Jefferson Driscoll wanted that land, and the movie ends with Hugh becoming an oil tycoon, which would never have happened if he would have been scared off by the cunningly devised schemes of Jefferson Driscoll. The term passing is simply describing the act of someone living as a so-called white person despite having some so-called black ancestry. Racial passing is a central theme in this film. There were two characters who were mulattoes and could have passed for white. The first character is our antagonist, Jefferson Driscoll. The film hinges on Jefferson Driscoll, a man caught between two worlds. Skinned like moonlight, he walks among the whites, erasing the shadow of his black heritage. He builds his life, the Driscoll Hotel, which was a monument to his rejection of his own roots. His hatred for so-called black folks stems from his hatred from his own mother, who is a so-called black woman. In a flashback, we are revealed that she unintentionally unconcealed his secret of his racial origins to a white woman he was having romantic relations with. He was so enraged by this that he even choked out his own mother. Therefore, any black clients that came to his hotel, he treated as barn animals. First, a man named Abraham, and then our protagonist Yvonne, who he thought was a so-called white lady at first glance, but realized she too was a fellow mulatto like he, and remaining faithful to his doctrine of hatred of self and hatred of so-called black folks, he treated them like barn animals. His hatred flowed deep within him that it was him who had the idea of using the Klan to try to scare Hugh off the land. Jefferson hated himself so much that when the Klan offered him to lead the charge of the Midnight Ride, he refuses, but you can tell that he was actually honored by that offer. However, God don't like ugly, and somehow Jefferson dies during the Midnight Ride. The next character was Yvonne, our protagonist. She was a mulatto, but she never was ashamed of who she was. Honestly, no one besides Jefferson Driscoll knew her actual race. It wasn't until the end of the movie where it is revealed to the other characters that she was of mixed ancestry. This moment was after Hugh became an oil king and Yvonne paid him a visit. Now, throughout the film, Hugh and Yvonne clearly had romantic feelings for each other, but neither one of them pursued each other in that way. It wasn't until years passed by, and when Yvonne paid him a visit, she shows him a certificate that she was a mulatto. This surprises Hugh because the whole time he thought that she was a so-called white girl. And due to the social taboo of interracial marriages, especially during the 1920s, he never pursued her. But with that revelation, the barrier came down and they lived happily ever after. Micheaux doesn't portray passing as a path to success or happiness. Instead, he shows how it isolates and destroys someone like it did Driscoll. The film contrasts Driscoll's self-hatred with Yvonne's pride and her heritage. Her strength comes from embracing her identity and not rejecting it. Unlike many other films in the era, the Symbol of the Unconquered doesn't portray the mixed-race character as an inherited trope of the tragic or tortured mulatto. It focuses on the human being of Driscoll and how his choices, not his race, led to his downfall. Overall, this film, though it has missing pieces, is still a film worth watching. For the sake of history, the portrayal of the Ku Klux Klan using violence and threats to try and force Yvonne and Hugh off their land is something that actually happened during this era that Micheaux created this film. That is something to marvel upon just by itself, that during this era of him creating films, things like that was happening. I recommend everyone to watch this film because this film is truly something special to watch, and it is a masterpiece, even with the surviving footage that we have left. And if this film makes you uncomfortable, then I genuinely believe you are missing out on a deep part of history. Till next time, peace.